Thank you so much, Shaylin, for that welcome introduction to Avery Center, and I'm happy to be with you this evening. I have a PowerPoint slide that I want to share with you all, and we'll go from there. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I will give time for Q&A after the presentation. Okay. So we'll kind of outline of today's talk. We'll have a brief discussion over the state of education in South Carolina after the Civil War. Then I'll talk about the Avery Research Center, our archival collections that we have, and time for Q&A. So South Carolina, as many of you hopefully know, was the Civil War. So the education, and as we know, African Americans, Black people were not allowed to read and write. And so the state of education and racial tensions was quite strong in Charleston and South Carolina. The thing about Charleston specifically is you have urban Charleston, city, downtown area, and then you have the Sea Islands. And so you got to recognize that slavery operated differently between the rural and urban life. And so those people who were enslaved downtown had different, quote unquote, freedom of movement. They was always tracked, but they're operated a different kind of community in the downtown Charleston area as opposed to the plantation life. Also note in Charleston, there are different hierarchies of Black people in Charleston. There were enslaved people who were owned by white people, but there were also mulattoes, people who, of mixed race descent. And so then you had people who were, a lot of those mulattoes had freedom, and so they operated a certain kind of class status even during the period of enslavement. So then after the Civil War, you would have, a hierarchy, a new kind of social structure occurs where people who were formerly enslaved can now operate in the city, but there's still, a history of tension between the Black communities. And one of the ways this is kind of shown in education. So there, after the Civil War, you have Reconstruction. And so the Black people were elected, Black men, particularly Black men, were elected to political office, and they created amendments to the Constitution. And one of those amendments was to public education for no matter what race you were, white or Black. And so that meant, poor white people can now also get an education that they were not allowed to previously. As you can imagine, wealthy white people were able to afford tutors or send their children off to overseas for education. And so the Black politicians, Reconstruction, kind of made public education access education widespread. And so that was, great for the community. Then you also have, at the same time, developing of private education. And so the main institution of private education on the Charleston Peninsula is the Avery Institute. And it was funded by the American Missionary Association, also known as the AMA. And so kind of just to backtrack a little bit, you have the Freedom Borough schools. And so those are kind of two kind of tracks of AMA and the Freedom's Borough schools. And so the AMA came to Charleston and talked to some of the the wealthy kind of elite Black people. And so we want to start the school and ended up building the current space that we are operating today in 1868. And the picture here is Francis Cardozo. He was kind of the first principal at Avery, and he helped to raise the money to get the building built, and he ended up leaving the school to become Secretary of State in the state later on. But he worked with the AMA leadership to create the school and was really focused on training people to become teachers and to kind of carry on a legacy of leadership and activism later on in the Charleston area. And they really focused on the classical education. So that meant focusing on Latin, working on, Greek and kind of the, classics that you would imagine. It might seem kind of incongruent with what the living experience of a person living in Charleston, South Carolina at the time, but they wanted to be on the same tier and learn the same things that some of these, the white children were learning and by their tutors and overseas. And people often ask me, where did the name Avery come from? And it comes from Charles Avery. He was a philanthropist out of Pennsylvania, and so out of Philadelphia. And so they named the building after him. So Avery established itself in 1868. The building was, the school entity in 1865. The physical space that is still standing is from 1868. But throughout that time, they were graduating people. And one of their Avery alums was John Dart. And he saw that the need to democratize education. So it wasn't just among elite people or those who could afford tuition, because people had to pay to attend Avery, was, $1, imagine. But at that time, $1 was a lot of funds to attend school. So he started the Charleston Industrial Institute, and then it changed names over time, such as the Charleston Color Industrial School, and then it became the Burke Industrial School. And the Burke School in operation still is operating today as a school. And so he had a building named Dart Hall, and in that building was where they had their first classes. They were teaching more about workshops and practical endeavors for students to learn about. Both boys and girls attended the school, so it was very open, and they wanted to have a moral education that was kind of, the standing guidelines for the school and why he thought it was important. And the school received a widely acclaim. Booker T. Washington came to Charleston and came to donate some funds to Burke High School, the Color Industrial School, to support the operations, and it was seen as a model of education. Interestingly enough, both the Color Industrial School and Avery were both considered models of education, models of how people in other cities should be operating, offering these two kind of pathways for people in the Charleston area. And so on here you have a picture of the industrial school with children standing outside in the buggy there from the 1901 report. And then in the other corner, you have a statement from Booker T. Washington. For those who can't read it, I will read it for you. I have visited Reverend J. L. Dart School in Charleston, South Carolina, and I feel that Mr. Dart is doing a good and much needed work among the colored people in that vicinity. I am sure that any help given him will be used in a way to accomplish good in the upbuilding of our people in that part of the South. And so that was kind of the solicitation that went out to people to continue to support the industrial school. So the Avery Number Institute was also operating, as I mentioned earlier, and W.E.D. Boys actually came to support Avery. And so there's a picture we have at Avery with him and the principal and some other Black leaders in Charleston. And so you kind of see the talented 10th kind of mindset happening at Avery. So, and people often ask, what does normal mean? And basically, it's a phrase or term used to indicate that you are training people to become teachers. That is how the normal comes to be in different institutions. So a lot of HBCUs started out as normal institutes, then grew up to be colleges, and other PWIs also were normals. So in 1900, they just under some kind of highlights of Avery's history. So a lot of the people that graduated from Avery went on to become teachers. So they successfully, accomplished that goal. But you'll see later on that a lot of the people that taught or graduated from Avery could not teach in Charleston. They had to teach on the islands because there was basically prohibition around Black teachers teaching on the peninsula. So a lot of the Avery people that taught at Avery were white women. And it wasn't until 1915 until we got our first Black faculty. And as part of the alumni and activism of what was taught at Avery, a lot of the alumni went on to become active with social justice and civil rights movement. And these are just a few examples of that. Edwin Harleston, he is an artist. His family owned a funeral home here in Charleston. And then he also helped to found the Charleston branch of the NAACP. Then in 1917, the wife of the president, the principal of Avery, Jeanette Cox, really founded the Phyllis Wheatley Literary Social Club, and this club and other clubs are really part of the Black club women's movement. And so you kind of see that the alumni of Avery and the community that surrounded Avery really pushed the limits of social activism and activating for equality in the Charleston area. And so it was really seen, Avery was seen as a guiding light to support Charleston society. So similar to that, we had the 1919 Red Summer across the country. There was an incident here in Charleston, and alumni and leadership of Avery also participated in getting activism around better quality of life around after that activity. Just for the 1930s. So they got so all through this time, the AMA was still helping to fund Avery with support from other folk, but the AMA was the main funder, and they got pressure and they, on funding private institutions. And so between 1930s, 1930 and about a 10-year pushing and pull between making it public and making from a private to a public institution. And that was due to funding. Another issue was workers and economic issues. And so with the World War II, operating influx of people coming to Charleston for jobs. And so there was white and Black tension. And as a result, the naval base decided not to hire Black workers, which obviously has an impact on, at Avery. A lot of the people who worked at the shipyard, at the naval yard, sent their children to Avery. So, that had a financial and social impact as well. And so they were able to meet with the Navy leadership and the city leadership to retroact that and to hire Black people at the naval base. The College of Charleston was one of the last schools to desegregate in South Carolina. They didn't desegregate to 1968. But Avery students So if we don't know where Avery is in relation to the College of Charleston, we are 5 blocks west of the college campus. And so you could imagine, you can't even walk down the street to go to the college. You have to go to one of the HBCUs or, in South Carolina or, elsewhere in the country. So 1944, a group of students from Avery petitioned and wrote letters, campaigned to the college to integrate, to push them to admit Black students. That was the college said no, and the college actually turned turned private to not integrate the schools. They encourage Black students to go to other HBCUs. Also, and during this time, Avery alumni are working on voter registration activities. Septima Clark, she graduated in 1916 from Avery, and then went on to be considered the mother of the civil rights movement, with impacting Rosa Parks, impacting Martin Luther King, impacting Coretta Scott King. And so really her and her family and other Charleston folk really helped to spur other activism in other parts of the country. So Avery stopped operating as a school in 1954. I should stop. They did become a public high school for a moment. So you may see they turned into the Avery High School. Just kept the same name Avery, but just took off the normal part of it and just became public high school. And that opened up more people to come into to be a part of the education that Avery offered. And so that, was great as well. But then in that transition, the city did not want to support both Burke and Avery. So they decided to close Avery, tear down Burke existing building, and then build a new building for them both to be in. And that was the end of Avery as a school, as a degree granting institution. And so I will tell you a little bit more about how it became an archive and museum in a minute. So just some pictures of Avery as campus scenes, I like to call them. So this book is called The School That Sings, that was written by the AMA to talk about the role of Avery in the Charleston community. And then you have a picture of a young man in the 12th Night costume. That was one of the plays that the students put on at Avery. The next picture is of gymnastics. So ultimately, Avery had a high school, had a football team, a basketball team, gymnastics, and a lot of different clubs. So it was really a well-rounded education for students to take in. The building behind them is the teachers' quarters. Or was teachers' quarters. It was in the school. And then the last picture here is of Shakespeare As You Like It from 1917. Just another kind of idea what kind of programs that they were doing at Avery. So 1954, the building closed as a school. So from 1954 to 1985, it had a different kind of history. It was closed, like abandoned basically, after the school was closed. But then a local community college here in Charleston, Palmer Community College, operated on this building as a business school basically. And so a couple of years ago, actually, we had um, alumni of Palmer come by the building and said, "We're alumni of Palmer." And so it's kind of two kind of alumni that came through the building. You have the Avery alumni, we call them the Averyites, and then you have the Palmer students. And so they have definitely two different histories of the building, and two different communities of the building. And then it closed as a Palmer campus because they went and got a bigger campus up the street in Charleston, and it was abandoned again. And it was got so that the city of Charleston wanted to turn the building into condos for housing needs of people. Alumni of Avery came together to approach the College of Charleston, as well as the state of South Carolina, to purchase the building. So Miss Lucille Whipper, she kind of got everyone together, as well as an archivist who was working here in the city, Margaretta Childs. And she was kind of the first one to tell Miss Lucille that there was an issue with the building and that, needs to be an effort to save the building. And so they started the Avery Institute of Afro-American History and Culture. They're still operating. They're the board, our friends board, basically, and they help to support our operations at Avery. But that group of people went to the state, went to the president of the college, and really petitioned and got them to agree to purchase the building and to operate it as a cultural center and research center for Black life and history. And that was 1980s. By that time, the school had desegregated, and they were trying to work on their desegregation efforts to make them more inclusive after that torrid history early on in their life. So the first, so that happened. And so our mission, as listed here, is to collect, preserve, and promote the unique history and culture of African diaspora, with emphasis on the Charleston and South Carolina Low Country. And we have a museum, exhibits, archival collections, libraries, and public programming. So we opened the building itself, opened 1990. The work to begin the collecting happened in 1985. Dr. Myrtle Glasgow was our first director, and she worked with Miss Lucy Weber to get some of our early collections, which were from, a lot of them were alumni of Avery history, like their diplomas, their pictures, their correspondences relating to operating as a school. They also she went out to get some of Sea Island history with Utah Jenkins papers and suitcase baskets. So it's really important early on to really document the life of people who ancestors, went to Avery. And some of the people who went to Avery were very excited to donate their papers. So our collections span from 1800s to 2019. We're working on an effort now to bring our collection to the 2020s. And then our collections are about 4,000 linear feet. They're on all 3 floors of the building at Avery. You might not tell it from the outside, but it is compact building, but we try to squeeze as much as possible for shelving and to get our collections there. We have 7 full-time staff members. We hire students from the College of Charleston, and we do internships from other people as well. Our collections really have textiles, photographs, artifacts, anything you really imagine to document someone's life or a life of a community. And so our mission, as we talk about and we do tours, the Research Center really bring the legacy of education. We are still educating people through work that we do. And so education is a pivotal point. And we engage people around that telling your history is important, and that without your history, you're really lost, right? So And relating to that, here are some examples of our collection items relating to individuals. So Cleveland Sellers, he was an activist. He's still alive. He is an activist here in South Carolina, and he was really pivotal in the Orangeburg Massacre activity that happened in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And that's his picture when he was arrested for his work. Then we have ideas relating to the African diaspora connection, and then his work towards politics. So really span, his whole life from a young person up to his time, the kind of middle-aged person, and how that kind of role and how people really get inspired with these documents. Could we do education workshops with college students, high school students? It really gets them inspired to know that they can do change as well, and that they're not alone. These issues, on civil rights, social justice, has been a long time happening. Similar to that, we preserve movements. So we have documentation to talk about social justice, civil rights movement here in Charleston, relating to boycotting, relating to hostile workers' strike in 1969, with Coretta Scott King and Ralph Abernathy came through. And then Samuel Clark goes over here. So in these ways, we show that South Carolina was pivotal in the civil rights movement. A lot of people think of Atlanta, think of Birmingham, Greensboro, but not Charleston. And so we highlight these stories, these narratives, to show that Charleston was pivotal in this conversation as well. And then we are collecting, as I mentioned earlier, current activism to show, people who are doing the work still today, so that people, do research in 30 years will know what is happening now here in 2019 and 2022. And so these are from flyers from a grassroots organization here in Charleston called the Low Country Action Committee. These are some pictures of our collections. So we are a closed stack library and archive, which means that we bring the materials down to you for you to use in our reading room. So these are our library books, our manuscript materials are in the corner, in the bottom middle, and then our artifacts room in the big picture. And yes, I mentioned earlier, without the items we preserve, interpreting the Black experience would be difficult and basically impossible. And so when we talk to people in the community about why they should donate, why they should support Avery, we use this this conversation about preserving and interpreting the Black experience, because if we don't have the records, they would say we're not there, that they were not here, that people did not exist. And so we are there to say that we exist. we are here, fully fledged people that laugh, that cry, that love, and activate. So to access our materials, we have a database called Archive Space, where you can use our finding aids, basically our collection inventories, and you can search what we have there. Also, for our library materials, you can look through our library catalog and see access materials there. Even though a lot of you might be in Louisiana, we do remote services. So if you look at library catalog and you find something you want to copy of, let us know, and we can photocopy or scan it and send it to you as well. We've been actively digitizing our collections for the past 15 years. And so we have a really robust digital archive that is accessible through the Low Country Digital Library. I just have a few screenshots that I will flow through here. LCDL is a consortia of different archive libraries and museums in the Low Country region that has put their materials online here. And then we have digital exhibits as well that uses our material as part of our education. And so these are a few examples of the digital exhibits on our DHI. We do a lot of outreach as well. So a couple of years ago, we did the Black History Bugle, which is geared towards middle and elementary students. There's 3 different issues, and you can access them on our website. We also do workshops on preserving family history, and we are actively working, documenting Black Lives Matter movement. We have a grant right now where we are collecting oral histories and other material relating to Black Lives Matter. And we also got a grant to digitize our photograph collections. We have 2 major collections of photography studios, Black-owned photography studios, and we are digitizing those collections and putting them online in the coming months. So we're open to the public Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 12:30 and then 1:30 to 4:30. There's no fee to access our collections. There's a fee for copies and things, but that's the only fee that you would have to use. We also do virtual consultations by Zoom. There's a way to put an appointment on the website as well. And there's our information. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aisha. That was wonderful. Does anyone have any questions?
I'll ask one. Well, first of all, thanks for a great talk. It's really interesting to see the legacy of Reconstruction era institutions live on into the present. A lot of times, I think we think of all of the destruction post-Reconstruction to those institutions and to the political life African Americans built during that period. So it's really interesting to see that not all of it was destroyed. Some of it continues to live on and do important work. My question is actually kind of nerdy and a little bit more specific than the historical stuff, but I was just wondering, at the end, you talked about some of the grants that you're working with, and I wonder, how do you measure public impact? So you obviously have a significant public impact, but sometimes the metric for that is hard to articulate, or I just wonder, how do you communicate that to granting institutions or to stakeholders? How do you measure it?
Yeah, thank you so much, David, for that question. Numbers is the baseline, but then above that, we often get emails or from people saying it's a great program, I learned a lot. So we do feedback survey forms with people. And then in terms of, I don't talk about this in this talk, but the other part of Avery is the RSJI, which is the Race and Social Justice Initiative. And so after the massacre at Mother Emanuel, Google wanted to give money to entity. So Google gave us money to do social justice work. And so one of the outcomes from that grant was a report of racial disparities. And so that report has been used by community groups to talk about racial disparities in the Charleston County. And it was the basis for racial bias, a police bias audit in North Charleston, and a push for here in Charleston. And it also was one of the pushing for the apology for slavery here in Charleston. So that report we see as a tool that communities could use to show the politicians that yes, there's issues here. And there's also in that report were solutions. And so they're like, okay, here are some solutions that are already written down for you. All you have to do is just do them. So that was very important. So that's the other kind of, part Avery beyond, collecting, and which is also very important, what we do, but as you said, impact, social impact, beyond just having a nice box of material, but what are people on a day-to-day basis? Through COVID, we ran a food pantry, and we also gave out PPE for people. And we started, we just put out a little free kitchen box, a blessings box outside of our building to really meet the hunger needs of people. So measuring that, we're not sure. It's just all good things, and we hope that karma comes back to us.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful and amazing that you're doing all that work.
Yeah.
We have a question in the chat. It's from Taylor Clement. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk, Aisha. I'm wondering if you have any advice for young researchers who want to get into archival research but don't quite know where to start. How might teachers use your archives in our classes to get readers started?
Yeah, I'm not sure what grade you teach, Taylor. But with the Bugle would be a really great spot I can put the link in the chat in a minute, but it's really accessible and talks about Reconstruction. Each issue is a different topic. So one is on Reconstruction, one on civil rights movement, and then one on archives, what archival research is. And so how I like to talk to young people about research is starting with your family and starting with your own personal records, and talk to them about, their phone, the picture of their phone. So that's their archive, and imagine how would you organize that? How do you preserve that? And what kind of story does your pictures tell you? And that makes it more personal. If you're more historical, I always find pictures of young people their age doing things. It always is relatable to them. Hopefully that helps, Taylor. But yeah, trying to where to start, it really depends on, I say just looking at digital libraries and just trying to browse through them as well and get your topics. But at LDHI, I will also we have an exhibit about educators and where educators can find information. Perfect.
One of the great things about archival research in general is that it really can teach students how to think outside of the box. A lot of times when you're doing archival research, you have to, let me back up. As archivists, we have to try to predict the multitude of ways researchers might approach something. And when you're doing community archival work, you also have to be respectful of the community in which that item or information was created, generated, and are used. So when we add subject terms or search terms for it, we have to take all of that into consideration. And so with archival research, it's a great way to really get students to kind of start thinking deeper about what they want to research and all the ways and all the things it's possibly connected to figure out how to actually find information. Personally, I think that's one of the coolest things about archives is you learn so many different words for the same thing sometimes in ways you would have never thought, or even finding that important interconnectivity and to things you would have never thought about if you weren't doing archival research.
Exactly. I did a workshop for high school students. We did a scavenger hunt. So it was a class about history class, and the teacher wanted me to come in and talk about the history of the school, Burke High School, actually. And so we brought in yearbooks, and I had a question, and they also used the yearbooks and other materials to locate the answer. And so I really got them engaged with the book, the material. So they're flipping through the book and looking at, the old hairstyles and things. And we've also learned more about their school through doing that. Okay. College students, yes. Yes, traveling. And so one thing I think about for college students that are trying to do research is to call ahead of time, call the archive or do a Zoom, so that they're not disappointed with if the archive doesn't have what they're looking for, or the archivist might know other collections beyond what's obvious that will help them in the research. And I also tell them that it's usually not, you're not going to find the one like document that answers all your questions. It's, there usually be looking at different boxes, different collections to locate your actual story. But yeah, it's all part of the journey. It's always fun. But yeah, if anyone is in Charleston area, we're not open for tourists yet. Probably open in March for tours. So if you're in the area, feel free to give us a call to make an appointment for your tour. But we also have online programming, so you can register for that, similar to the Avery Center.
Did you add a link for your online programming in the chat box for your calendar and upcoming events?
I can.
Good. And once things are open, do you have a favorite item in your collection? Our collection. Do you have a favorite item or collection in Avery?
People always ask me that. I always get what should I say? But I think my favorite collection at Avery is, it's a small collection, but it's Elizabeth the Bear collection. She kind of documented the history of midwives. And I think that is an interesting history that still needs to be kind of researched, given the reproductive issues in this country.
Well, it's a very popular topic right now. Black midwifery is on the rise again. So, might be something, y'all might want to promote, that you have a collection on that, get some more use, especially since that's a very real and active conversation right now. I think, to me, what's so exciting about the Avery Research Center and the Avery Normal Institute is that in its own way, its existence also challenges so many stereotypes, especially about newly freed communities in the South. And the time in which it was created also challenges like a stereotype about like the idea that Black people didn't want to be educated, or were so uncivilized that they didn't understand the value of education. Yet you had institutions like the AMA very quickly, right after the Civil War, building and creating these kind of a normal institute to train Black people to teach. So like these documents, these buildings, these artifacts are literally in contest to the narrative that was even being created at that time. And the way, we didn't get to talk about it a lot tonight because it is in itself, it is numerous papers, it is numerous panels about like the way Black education was shaped and is still being shaped to also like provide a balance to also like the Black lived experience. And looking at spaces like the Avery Normal Institute and these places that were creating teachers, and Gaines's work specifically in A Lesson Before Dying, Grant has a memory of his teacher who was telling him what to expect when becoming a teacher. That wasn't just like, you might have trouble with the students, but understanding the political system and what you were working in and trying to find a way, even though his teacher wasn't necessarily nice, or optimistic, we would now say, but he was very real about the situation and knowing like these are also things that had to be taken consideration when you were learning to be an educator, and also what you had to teach to the children, regardless if it was fair or not. You had to think about all of these concepts and what that meant for your children, your students, and what that meant for you as a professional. How do you navigate these spaces? And so quickly after Reconstruction, schools were being built, not just for children, but also for young adults to become educators themselves. And that's something that I think speaks so many volumes about, and is well, no longer poorly researched. It's getting a lot of attention. It finally started garnering a lot of attention, but it's something that will continue to garner a lot of attention, I hope. So that was really cool, I think.
A new book out by Jarvis Gibbons is talking about Carter G. Woodson and educators, and how, you know, a lot of the Black educators use education to promote pride and promote, you know, empower young people into society. And so it's really an important book. I would encourage you interested in education and how teachers navigated, you know, the push and tug of politics and teaching Black people, Black children what they need. I recommend you to read that book.
Would you mind putting the book title in the chat box?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Any other questions or comments or observations, fun facts? Aisha, you're muted.
Sorry, I was saying I'm hurrying up to put the link in the chat.
Well, you guys, thank you guys so much for attending. I'm not going to rush and end the meeting because there's a lot of really good information in the chat. So I'm gonna hang around a little bit and give people time to grab that information and, you know, bookmark it or save it, however they would like. I am so glad you guys were able to join us tonight. I hope you've enjoyed the talk. Thank you again from the Ernest J. Gaines Center. Thank you, Aisha, for taking time out of your day to tell us about such a fascinating place as an Avery Research Center. If anyone ever gets to go to Charleston, especially after March, I think, take time to go to the Avery Research Center. It is a beautiful space, and the faculty and staff there is, as you can tell from Aisha, are really quite knowledgeable and just all around amazing people. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us. And thank you guys all for attending.
Thank you. Good night.
Night, everyone.
Yeah, that went okay. Oh, I stopped recording again.